Hello, everyone. I'm Kristin Frangoulis and the host of Arts by the Bay. And today my guest is Duncan Newcomer, writer, scholar, and a reverend.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
I've also been a psychotherapist and a teacher.
And a teacher, a Renaissance man.
Yes.
And
thank you.
he's here
Reformed,
today
yeah.
because he has a new book.
I have.
And can I hold this up? It is called 30 Days with Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is a very interesting idea because it didn't start off as a book, did it?
It started out as a radio show.
And tell us about that.
I went to WERU a couple years ago and said, how would you like to have a feature on the spiritual life of Abraham Lincoln? And they looked at me cross-eyed. Like,
They're going, spiritual?
yeah, and Lincoln, old dead white guy, what do you mean?
Right.
But they were in agreement, and so we started. So I've done over 230 shows now.
So it's been more than 30 days.
Oh yeah, it's been
230
couple years, yeah.
And tell us the format of these radio shows.
It's just 5 minutes. It's a feature at 7:30 on Wednesday morning, and
I'm going to have to start tuning in.
it's also archived, so you don't
I
have
can go to the archives.
Right, and it's sent on the World Wide Web, whatever that is. It's just it begins in a certain way. I say, this is Quiet Fire.
That's the name of...
About the spiritual life of Abraham Lincoln and its relevance to us today. This is Duncan Newcomer. Welcome. I have a Lincoln quote for you. That's how it starts every week. So then I have a quote from Lincoln, and then I talk about Lincoln and his spiritual relevance to us. It's not a political show, and it's not a literary show. It's a spiritual show. It's about a slice of Lincoln that not everybody thinks about much, and that is what was deeper for him than politics and literature, and it was something spiritual.
And not necessarily any particular institutional denomination.
That's what's so intriguing to me about him. He worshipped often at a Presbyterian church in Washington and also in Springfield, but he never joined it. And to join a Presbyterian church in those days, you had to make a confession of faith, and he never did that. So he never accepted Jesus Christ as his only Lord and Savior, for example.
Now,
His wife did.
your reverent background is what denomination?
I've been a Presbyterian and a Congregationalist. The United Church of Christ, UCC.
Right, right.
So his...
Which is like the Presbyterians.
A little bit.
Except for their government.
A little bit, yeah. So his spiritual life has a secular quality to it that I think is particularly valuable for us now, because a lot of people want something spiritual in their politics and in their personal lives, but they don't want something that they think of as institutional or religious.
Well,
so he's perfect for that.
And so many people have walked away from institutional religions.
That's true.
You know, the standard Methodist, Presbyterian.
It's gone down 15% in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone way down. We attend an Episcopal church, and I know the Episcopal church is having that issue as well. You know, and you look around, and the congregation is quite lightheaded.
Gray.
When I mean gray or white, yes.
Yeah. So there is a new religious energy in the country, and but it doesn't end up in churches often.
Right. So I personally love Abraham Lincoln.
You're not alone.
I know. I was reading in your introduction, over 15,000 books have been written about Abraham Lincoln, which makes a 34-foot tower. And the only other human or divine was Jesus Christ, who had more than that.
Right, yeah.
So he's this fascinating character.
He is, yeah.
My father's family were immigrants from Sweden. And my Swedish aunt, my family lived in the D.C. area, and my Swedish aunts came to visit. And the one thing that they wanted to do was to go see the Lincoln Memorial.
Right. Yeah.
And they cried.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Yeah.
they went there.
Lincoln is a doorway into America. So it's, I'm not surprised that they did that. And the last feature in this book is about people lingering at the Lincoln Memorial. And I actually spent my 50th birthday sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial looking at a full moon rising up over the reflecting pool.
It's a wonderful statue.
Yeah, and just
It's
thinking
really-
about...
So why is Lincoln so relevant today, Duncan? Because I know you feel very strongly about that.
Well, he does a number of things politically and humanly that we need. He was able to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. He had principles.
War between the states.
He was able to see both sides.
His wife was from Kentucky, and he was too.
He was too, yeah. And his sister-in-law had relatives that fought for the
On the other
Confederacy.
side.
Yeah,
Because Kentucky was one of those
border states.
border states.
So he has that ability to tolerate ambiguity. Paradox is a word people use. And he also has a quality of leadership that isn't in your face. He was a strong leader, but he was a flexible leader, and he wasn't an ideologue. He wasn't, for example, an abolitionist. He hated slavery, but he was moderate and conservative in the sense that he respected our institutions.
Knowing that it was an economic institution for a lot of people.
North and South. Yeah. So those are some of the relevances.
Because
of him.
a lot of the Northerners brought the slaves in.
And benefited from them. Yeah.
Right. Would you read for us a bit from your book?
Sure. Let's do the Lincoln Memorial part.
I did my undergraduate thesis on Carl Sandburg. So I read, the
right.
3-volume
Yeah.
Lincoln by Sandburg as part of my research.
Okay.
And
Well, Sandburg was my doorway too. I have an article about him in here. Okay. You want me to read some?
yes, I do.
Lingering with Lincoln. This is for the 30th day. The book is organized so that people can read one thought per day or per evening, per morning or evening. They can also hear the archive. There's a little QR code, so you can actually go to the WOU archives and hear me read this. And there are also some study guides and stuff in the back. Okay. People linger at the Lincoln Memorial. The quote above is what Dr. Wayne Baker, professor and friend of mine, observed when he and his wife and young son visited the Lincoln Monument in Washington, D.C., that people mill around, just like your Swedish relatives, walk slowly out and walk back in. He added, it's as if they don't want to leave. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you felt that way too. It's very quiet at the Lincoln Memorial, inside those columns and walls. Could this pull to remain in that space be proof that Abraham Lincoln was simply the real deal? That we know there wasn't a fake bone in his body? Of course, his views on race, government, or even God might not be all that we want for now, but we also know that he brought politics near to our ideals. As we like to say, he walked his talk. Lincoln had an almost mystical sense of the people. Remember those words, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's the beautiful circle of, by, and for. He was, with his own words, weaving a web of connection. He called it union. I think we trust that calling, that honest calling today. Lincoln was a common man, and most of us are common too. And we want what is good for the commonwealth, as well as to be included in that. It's a real and spiritual pull that we feel. So this goes on, but that's the start.
Well, that's a very interesting thing, common man, commonwealth.
Yeah, yeah.
I never actually thought about the word that way.
People talk about Lincoln as a self-made man. He actually had a lot of ambition and drive and ability, but he was a community-made man. He cared more about the esteem of his fellows than about his ego. So community and commonwealth is fundamental to him and is so much what we need to refocus on now. American individualism. I used to be a psychotherapist, so I did a lot about individual life with people. Our community life, what I think so valuable about what you all do with your television shows, it's establishing community. We are going to need that more and more as the climate
It's become
change.
more and more polarized.
Yeah, and Lincoln is a way to deal with polarization. There's an organization called Better Angels. I do some work for them.
Which is one of his phrases, isn't
And that was, he's the better angels of our nature.
it? Which is...
So we need
people
to
use that
cultivate.
all the time without realizing that came from Lincoln.
He had it, he read it in a small childhood reader of his. It's a phrase that he had seen as a kid, the better angels of our nature.
And of course, a lot of his things come from, are Bible-based,
They are,
from his childhood, from his mother reading.
absolutely.
To him.
Yeah. There's a wonderful novel by Richard Schlotkin called Young Abe, and he pictures Lincoln cradled in his mother's lap. And we're not sure whether she could read or not, but she had memorized the
it,
Bible.
yeah.
So she's telling him these Bible stories about Moses and stuff. And that really shaped him, along with Shakespeare.
Like a house divided cannot stand is a biblical reference,
It is.
which he's so famous for in his
Yeah.
speech.
Yeah.
And I guess when he wrote the Gettysburg Address, it was considered a failure and a disgrace because it was so short and so unflowery and
It competed 272 words against I think at least a 2-hour talk by Edward Everett, who was the star of the day.
the
Yeah.
style of the day of
Yeah.
the pedantic
Yeah.
rhetoric.
Yeah.
And I guess Lincoln had a tremendous melancholy
He did.
about him and depression.
One of the best books I've read about him is Lincoln's Melancholy, How Depression Shaped a President by Joshua Wolf Shank. And I don't think it was depression. I think it was sorrow over losses. He lost his baby brother, his older sister,
Anne Rutledge,
and
his
his
first
mother,
love.
and his first love.
And a child.
2 children. Yeah.
2 children, yeah.
Yeah. So sorrow.
What was it's a fairly recent book where he goes to the sepulcher where
Lincoln
his
in the Bardo, right?
Lincoln in the Bardo,
Yeah.
right? Have you read that?
I have, yeah.
That's one. It's on my
very
list.
interesting. And it's another example of how the spiritual life of Lincoln is what is grabbing people's attention now, because that book, Charles Sanders, I think it was George Sanders, uses Buddhist texts. The whole idea of the Bardo is a Buddhist concept of like a purgatory place. So it's a way of using spiritual language and images to reveal his compassion and his depth.
Well, I think I think the Greeks had it figured out that we are 3 things. We're spirit, mind,
And
and
body.
body.
Yeah.
And I think that people right now are starved
Yeah.
for that spiritual component, which is often so lacking
Yeah.
in culture today.
People, if they read this book once a morning and once a night, will have something more spiritual happen in their lives. People that have reviewed the book have said this book will change you, and I didn't set out to do that, but it will feed that hunger that you're talking about, of something lasting and deep and vital.
That transcends politics and
Yeah. His final word for God was a living God. Early in his life, he talked about a divine necessity, and then he talked about there's a necessity that shapes our end, rough hew them though we will, from Shakespeare. But then he talked about God as the Almighty. But at the end, he talked about a living God, and I think that's what people are looking for. something truly alive.
Well, thank you, Duncan. This
Are
has
we
been
done?
so interesting. Yes.
I can't.
This is Duncan Newcomer,
Can't
his
stop me from
latest
talking,
book,
can you?
30 Days with Abraham Lincoln.
Quiet Fire.
Quiet Fire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.